One pill. That's all it was supposed to be. A simple remedy for a restless night. But by morning, she was gone. At 6:12 a.m., a 911 call shattered the early morning silence in a quiet neighborhood just outside Atlanta, Georgia. The voice on the line was frantic, gasping for breath between words. My wife. She's not breathing. I think she took too much of her sleeping meds. Please hurry. The caller, Daniel Hayes, sounded panicked, his voice cracking as he pleaded for help. The dispatcher tried to calm him, instructing him to check for a pulse and to start chest compressions, but he kept saying the same thing. She's cold. She's not moving. I think she's gone. When paramedics arrived minutes later, they rushed into the master bedroom, expecting a medical emergency. Instead, they found 38-year-old Lauren Hayes lying motionless under the covers. Her dark brown hair was still neatly tucked behind her ear. Her nightshirt, a soft gray cotton, had no wrinkles, no signs of distress. And then there was her face, expressionless, still, lips tinged with a faint blue hue. One of the paramedics, a seasoned responder with over 15 years on the job, instinctively reached for Lauren's wrist. But the moment his fingers touched her skin, he hesitated. She was cold, too cold. Lauren Hayes hadn't just passed away moments ago. She had been dead for hours. Daniel stood in the doorway, his arms wrapped tightly around himself, rocking slightly as if trying to hold himself together. He kept repeating the exact words, over and over. She just took her sleeping pill. Just one pill. It was supposed to help her sleep. On the nightstand, an open pill bottle sat next to a framed wedding photo. The label confirmed it was a standard prescription sleep aid. Just one pill. That's all it was supposed to be. But something didn't sit right. A veteran detective would later describe it as a gut feeling, that subtle sense that something was off. The bed looked too undisturbed, as if Lauren had simply laid down and never moved again. There was no water glass nearby. And when they checked the bathroom trash, they found something even more unsettling. A prescription bottle for the same medication. But this one had Lauren's maiden name on it. The problem? That prescription had been filled nearly 2 years earlier. Before the sun had fully risen over the quiet neighborhood, crime scene tape was being stretched across the front yard. What should have been a routine call, an accidental overdose, an unfortunate tragedy, had just become something else entirely. Lauren Hayes was the kind of person people gravitated toward. At 38, she had built a life that, from the outside, seemed picture perfect. She was warm, charismatic, and always the first to offer help. Whether it was organizing a charity event at her church or staying late at work to help a struggling colleague. Friends described her as the kind of woman who made others feel seen. She had a way of remembering the small things, birthdays, favorite coffee orders, even the stories people told her in passing. Born and raised in Charleston, South Carolina, Lauren grew up in a close-knit family. She was the youngest of 3 siblings, the one who always managed to bring everyone together, even when life pulled them in different directions. After college, she moved to Atlanta for a job in marketing, where she quickly climbed the ranks due to her sharp mind and natural ability to connect with people. By her mid-30s, she was leading significant campaigns for a national firm, earning both the respect of her colleagues and a salary that allowed her to live comfortably. But beyond the professional success and the bright smile, those closest to her new Lauren carried quiet burdens. She had struggled with anxiety for years, something she rarely spoke about outside her inner circle. Stress kept her up at night, and over time, she relied on prescription sleep aids to get the rest she needed. Still, to the world, she was thriving, a loving wife, a dedicated friend, a woman with a bright future. At the center of that future was Daniel Hayes. Daniel was Lauren's opposite in many ways. Where she was outgoing, he was reserved. Where she thrived on social connections, he preferred solitude. A financial analyst, Daniel was meticulous and disciplined. He had a structured way of viewing the world, believing that hard work and careful planning were the keys to success. The two met through mutual friends at a holiday party in 2012. Lauren had been the one to start the conversation, drawn in by Daniel's quiet, intelligent demeanor. He was different from the men she had dated before. Calm, composed, someone who seemed to ground her in a way she didn't know she needed. They married 3 years later in a small, elegant ceremony by the water, exchanging vows in front of family and close friends. For years, their life together looked stable. They had a beautiful home in an upscale neighborhood, weekend getaways to the mountains, and dinner parties with friends. But there were cracks, small at first, easy to ignore. Daniel was particular about certain things, how the house should be kept, how finances should be managed, and even how Lauren should handle stress. He didn't believe in therapy, dismissing it as unnecessary. When Lauren's anxiety flared, he would remind her to toughen up and stop overthinking things. Friends noticed subtle shifts in Lauren over the years. She laughed a little less and hesitated before speaking, as if weighing her words carefully. She stopped sharing as much about her struggles. But if anyone asked, she would brush it off. Marriage is work, right? Daniel and I just have different ways of handling things. Then, there was the argument at a friend's birthday dinner a year before Lauren's death. Witnesses recalled the way Daniel's jaw clenched when Lauren ordered another glass of wine. The way he leaned in and whispered something to her that made her eyes drop to her lap. She barely spoke for the rest of the evening. Later, she told a friend it was nothing. But when she thought no one was looking, she rubbed her wrist absent-mindedly, as if remembering the way he had grabbed it under the table. Despite this, no one saw what was coming. By all appearances, the Hayes home was peaceful. It was a modern 2-story house with white shutters, a neatly trimmed lawn, and a driveway where Lauren's silver sedan and Daniel's black SUV sat side by side. But the night Lauren died, something shifted within those walls. When investigators examined that home closer, they noticed things that didn't quite fit. The man who had once appeared as a grieving husband started looking like something else entirely. In the weeks leading up to Lauren Hayes' death, something in her life had shifted. Friends noticed it in small ways at first. A hesitation in her voice, a nervous glance over her shoulder. Lauren had always been the type to check in on others, but lately, she had been the one reaching out more often, making plans she never used to initiate. It was subtle and easy to overlook. But looking back, those closest to her realized that she had been trying to say something without saying it outright. Her best friend, Nicole Chambers, still remembers the last time they met for coffee, just 10 days before Lauren was found unresponsive in bed. She had arrived looking tired, her usual polished appearance slightly off, her nails unpainted, her sweater wrinkled, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. They talked about work and the upcoming weekend. But then, in the middle of stirring her drink, Lauren paused. She glanced at the door, then back at Nicole. "Do you ever feel like something is just off?" she asked quietly. Nicole had laughed, assuming it was about work stress or another one of Lauren's restless nights. But Lauren didn't laugh with her. Instead, she shook her head and muttered, "Never mind." At the time, Nicole had let it go. Now she wishes she hadn't. Lauren had always been careful with her finances, but in the weeks before her death, she made a quiet but significant change. She opened a separate bank account. It wasn't much, just a few deposits here and there, but it was something she had never done before. Investigators would later discover that she had also looked up rental properties, all small one-bedroom apartments in areas far from where she and Daniel lived. Then there were the purchases, things that didn't fit her usual spending habits. A prepaid phone bought in cash. A small suitcase was ordered online but never used. And, perhaps most telling of all, a book on legal separation that she had checked out from the library but never returned. Those closest to her began to recall other moments, little flashes of unease that had seemed like nothing at the time. Her coworker at the marketing firm remembered how Lauren had stayed late one evening, long after everyone else had left. When asked why, she shrugged and said, "I just needed some space." Her brother, Matt, recalled a phone call in which she mentioned looking forward to Thanksgiving with their family. "I just need a break from everything here." When he asked if something was wrong, she laughed it off. "Nothing I can't handle." But there was one conversation that stood out the most. 2 days before her death, Lauren called her mother. It was late, almost midnight, and her voice had an edge to it, soft and hesitant, but not in the usual way. "I think I made a mistake," she had said. What do you mean? Her mother asked. There was silence. Never mind. Forget I said anything. The evening of Lauren's death started unremarkable. She had spent the afternoon at work, leaving just before 6 p.m. Security footage from her office building showed her walking out, keys in hand, her pace steady. She didn't stop to chat with anyone and didn't linger like she usually did. Her phone records show that she made one call on the drive home to Nicole. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. Just checking in, Lauren had said. You okay? Nicole asked. Yeah, just tired. She arrived home at 6:37 p.m. Her silver sedan pulled into the driveway, the automatic garage door closing behind her. Neighbors later reported hearing nothing unusual that night. No arguments, no loud noises, nothing that would have hinted at what was coming. But inside the house, something was happening. Lauren's final text message was sent at 9:13 p.m. It wasn't to her mother or Nicole. It was to her boss. Can we talk tomorrow? There's something I need to figure out. Her boss never responded. He had already gone to bed. And by the time he saw the message the following day, Lauren was already gone. Daniel Hayes would later tell investigators that the evening was routine. They had dinner together, pasta and salad, nothing unusual. They watched television for a while, and then Lauren went upstairs while he stayed in the living room to finish a work email. But his story had gaps. When detectives asked what they had talked about at dinner, he hesitated. Nothing important. When asked if Lauren had seemed upset, he shook his head. No, she was fine. When asked why he hadn't noticed she was unresponsive until morning, he claimed he was a heavy sleeper. She went to bed early. I didn't want to wake her. But there was one thing he couldn't explain. The home's smart thermostat recorded unusual activity that night. At 2:45 a.m., someone manually adjusted the temperature down, significantly lower than usual. It was a small detail, something most people wouldn't even notice. But investigators did, because that meant that, at least 2 hours before Daniel claimed to have woken up, someone was still awake in that house. At 6:12 a.m., a 911 dispatcher answered a call that began like so many others. A frantic voice, desperate for help. She won't wake up. I think it's the medication. The man on the line was Daniel Hayes. His breathing was uneven, his words tumbling over each other as he pleaded for paramedics to hurry. He identified himself, gave his address, and then repeated the exact phrase. She's not breathing. I don't know what happened. The dispatcher asked the standard questions. Was she warm to the touch? Could he feel a pulse? Had she taken anything unusual the night before? Daniel hesitated. Just her sleeping pill. She takes them all the time. How many did she take? I don't know. Maybe 1 or 2. There was a pause. A shift in tone. Sir, I need you to start chest compressions until help arrives. But Daniel didn't answer right away. There was a rustling noise like the phone had been set down, and then his voice came back, more distant. I think it's too late. By the time paramedics arrived at the Hayes home, just 6 minutes after the call, they expected a medical emergency. They hurried through the front door, bags in hand, prepared to perform life-saving measures. But when they entered the bedroom, something felt off. Lauren Hayes was lying on her back, perfectly still beneath the covers. Her hands rested at her sides, the sheets pulled up neatly as if she had simply drifted off to sleep. Her dark brown hair was tucked away from her face, her expression eerily serene. One of the paramedics, a veteran with years of experience, reached for her wrist. The moment his fingers touched her skin, he knew. She wasn't just unresponsive. She was cold. Too cold for someone who had supposedly just passed away. A second paramedic checked for lividity, the pooling of blood that occurs after death. It was fixed, meaning she had been dead for hours. One of them turned to Daniel, who was standing near the doorway, hands gripping the sides of his head. When was the last time you saw her breathing? Daniel swallowed hard. Last night, around 10. She said she was tired, so she went to bed early. I didn't want to wake her. There was no sign of forced entry. No sign of a struggle. The only thing on the nightstand was a half-empty pill bottle with Lauren's name on it. To the untrained eye, it could have looked like an accident, a tragic overdose. But to the first responders in that room, something didn't sit right. The first red flag was the condition of Lauren's body. Rigor mortis had already set in. A person doesn't become that stiff immediately, it takes time. Hours. That meant Lauren had died much earlier than Daniel had claimed. The second red flag was the scene itself. Overdose victims rarely pass away so neatly, so peacefully. The body typically shows signs of distress. Vomiting, labored breathing, and sometimes even attempts to move before unconsciousness takes over. But Lauren? She looked untouched, as if she had simply lain down and never moved again. Then there was the pill bottle. It sat on the nightstand, the cap off, a few pills rattling inside. At first glance, it seemed to support Daniel's story. Lauren had trouble sleeping, she took medication for it, and maybe this time she had taken too much. But when investigators looked closer, they found something strange. The label had been peeled back slightly, revealing another label underneath. The original prescription was from 2 years ago, under Lauren's maiden name. And inside, the pills didn't match the ones listed on the label. If Lauren had taken medication before bed, was it really from that bottle? And if not, what had she actually ingested? The paramedics contacted law enforcement. Within an hour, crime scene tape was stretched across the front yard. Lauren's body was transported to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy. Daniel Hayes was taken in for questioning. At that moment, it was still unclear what had happened in that bedroom. But within days, the coroner's report would reveal something no one had expected. The official cause of death was initially listed as pending toxicology results. But even before the results came back, there were clear signs that Lauren's death wasn't as simple as Daniel had claimed. During the autopsy, the medical examiner noted that Lauren's stomach contents contained minimal residue of the sleeping medication Daniel insisted she had taken. If she had truly overdosed, there should have been a higher concentration. But there was something else. Traces of another substance were found in her system, one not listed on any prescription she had. It was a powerful sedative, one often used in hospitals to induce deep sleep. In small doses, it could make a person groggy. In larger doses, it could slow breathing to a dangerous level. And in the amount found in Lauren's system, it was lethal. But how had it entered her body? Then came the final discovery. A faint discoloration on Lauren's inner arm. A nearly invisible mark. When tested, it was confirmed that Lauren hadn't swallowed anything fatal. She had been injected. This wasn't an accidental overdose. This wasn't a tragic mistake. Someone had administered that drug directly into her bloodstream. And the only person in that house with her that night was Daniel Hayes. The moment the coroner's report confirmed that Lauren Hayes hadn't died from an accidental overdose, the case shifted. What had initially seemed like a tragic misjudgment, too many sleeping pills, a body simply giving out, was now something far more deliberate. Lauren hadn't overdosed. She had been poisoned, and someone had injected the substance directly into her bloodstream. There were only two possibilities. She had done it to herself or someone had done it to her. Detectives didn't waste time. The first thing they looked at was Daniel Hayes. He was the only person in the house with Lauren that night, the one who claimed to have found her, the one who had dialed 911. His account of events was already raising questions. His timeline didn't match the estimated time of death, and his reactions had been strange. But suspicion wasn't enough. They needed proof. They started with his phone. Daniel had willingly handed it over during initial questioning, appearing cooperative. But forensic specialists weren't looking for deleted texts or suspicious calls. They were looking at his search history. And what they found, it was chilling. 2 weeks before Lauren's death, Daniel had searched. How long does it take for a sedative to leave the system? Fastest-acting sleep medications. How to make someone fall asleep instantly. 5 days before Lauren's death, his searches became even more specific. Is propofol detectable in an autopsy? How to make a death look like natural causes. Then, the night before Lauren died at 11:27 p.m., hours after he claimed she had already gone to bed, he searched. How long does it take for a body to go cold after death? That search had been deleted, but forensic specialists recovered it. And then came the financial records. Lauren had been careful with money. She balanced budgets and double-checked statements. But in the last month of her life, she had taken out nearly $5,000 in cash withdrawals, amounts she had never pulled before. Investigators traced the withdrawals to separate locations, never the same place twice. It looked like she had been trying to hide the transactions. What was she planning to do with that money? Then they looked at Daniel's spending. One purchase stood out immediately, made just 3 days before Lauren's death. A minor pharmacy outside of town. Paid in cash. The item? A vial of propofol. The same drug was found in Lauren's system. Lauren had been loved. She had close friends, a family who adored her, and co-workers who described her as kind, dependable, and full of life. But as detectives spoke to those who knew her best, another picture emerged. One of a woman who had been quietly preparing to leave. Nicole Chambers, Lauren's best friend, was the first to break down in the interrogation room. She told me she didn't feel safe anymore, but she didn't say why. Nicole had tried to press for details. Is he hurting you? Lauren hesitated, then whispered, not in the way you think. Her mother confirmed the same. She wasn't herself. She kept saying she needed to figure things out before it was too late. Her brother, Matt, had noticed it too. She called me last month and asked if she could stay with me for a little while. She never explained why, but no one had connected the dots in time. Lauren had been making moves, slow, quiet steps toward leaving Daniel. But she hadn't left fast enough. And Daniel? He had noticed. Toxicology reports were clear. Lauren had been injected with a lethal dose of propofol. But there was something else. A secondary substance. Low levels of a benzodiazepine, typically used to calm anxiety or cause drowsiness. Not enough to be lethal, but enough to make someone groggy and disoriented. Enough to make them easier to control. It wasn't just that Daniel had poisoned Lauren. He had sedated her first. The discovery led detectives back to the pharmacy receipt from 3 days before her death. It showed one purchase, propofol. But there had been another transaction that same day, at a different location. Security footage confirmed it. Daniel Hayes, standing in line at another pharmacy, purchasing an over-the-counter sleep aid. The same kind was found in Lauren's system. The pieces were coming together. Lauren had gone to bed that night, unaware of what was coming. The sedative had been in her system, making her drowsy. By the time the injection was administered, she likely never woke up. Daniel had staged the scene, left the pill bottle open, and waited hours before calling 911. But he hadn't planned for one thing. Technology had caught him through his phone searches and deleted history, financial records, and pharmacy footage. And now, detectives had enough to arrest him. They just needed to make sure he didn't see it coming. Daniel Hayes walked into the interrogation room with the confidence of a man who believed he had already escaped suspicion. He had cooperated from the beginning, handing over his phone, sitting through questioning, expressing grief in front of the cameras. To anyone watching, he was a grieving husband, devastated by an unexpected tragedy. But detectives had spent days unraveling his version of events, and now they were ready to discredit him. The lead detective sat across from him, flipping through a file. For a long moment he didn't speak. He simply let the silence settle. Daniel shifted in his seat. "I've already told you everything," he said, forcing frustration into his voice. The detective nodded, still scanning the file. "You did. And that's why we need to go over it again." Daniel exhaled sharply. "I don't understand. I called for help. I was there when they took her away. And now you're treating me like a suspect." The detective finally looked up, meeting his gaze. "Tell me again about the last time you saw Lauren alive." Daniel hesitated. It was a simple request, but this time he knew something had changed. It was around 10. She said she was tired, so she went to bed early. The detective tilted his head. "That's interesting. According to your phone records, you were searching for information about rigor mortis just after 11. Hours before you called 911. Daniel's expression faltered, but he recovered quickly. I don't remember that. Maybe I was looking something up for a case I saw on the news. The detective leaned forward slightly. What about your purchase at the pharmacy? 3 days before Lauren died. Daniel blinked. What? I don't know what you mean. The detective slid a photograph across the table. Security footage. Daniel at the register, placing a small brown bag on the counter. This is you buying propofol, a drug not prescribed to you or Lauren. A drug that was found in her system. How do you explain that? His jaw tightened. I didn't buy that. It's right here, Daniel. Another beat of silence. Daniel's hands clenched into fists on the table. The detective continued, his voice calm. Lauren didn't overdose. She didn't take too many sleeping pills. She was injected. And the only person with access to her that night was you. For the first time, Daniel's mask slipped. The grief, the outrage, the confusion. It all faded. His expression flattened, and his eyes darkened. And then he did something that caught even the most seasoned detectives off guard. He smiled. As investigators dug deeper, they found what they had been looking for: motive. Daniel had painted the picture of a devoted husband, but beneath the surface, his life had been unraveling. Just months before Lauren's death, she updated her life insurance policy. The original beneficiary was her brother. The new one was Daniel. The payout was $750,000. She had also made an appointment with a divorce attorney. Bank statements showed withdrawals she had been making, likely to prepare for her escape. And then there was the final piece: a second phone. Detectives found it hidden in a locked drawer in Daniel's home office. Although it had been wiped clean, forensic specialists recovered fragments of deleted messages. They weren't to Lauren. They were to another woman. I can't wait any longer. She won't leave. But I have a plan. Just a little more time and we'll be free. Detectives traced the number to a woman in another state. When they questioned her, she was visibly shaken. He told me they were separated, that she was refusing to sign the papers. But there were no papers. Lauren hadn't signed anything because she hadn't been served. Daniel had lied. And now all the pieces were in place. He had a failing marriage, financial trouble, and a new relationship waiting for him. Lauren was an obstacle. He needed her gone, and he had made sure it happened. Daniel Hayes was still seated in the interrogation room when the door opened again. 2 officers entered, standing behind him. Daniel Hayes, you are under arrest for the murder of Lauren Hayes. The moment the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, his entire demeanor changed. Gone was the smug confidence. Gone was the forced grief. For the first time since his wife's death, he looked genuinely afraid. You're making a mistake, he muttered, shaking his head. The officers didn't respond. They pulled him to his feet and led him toward the door. Before he was taken out of the room, the lead detective spoke one last time. You thought you covered your tracks. You thought no one would notice. But Lauren knew. And now? So do we. Daniel's expression didn't change. He just stared. And then, without another word, he was led away. Lauren Hayes was more than a name in a headline. To her family, she was irreplaceable. A daughter, a sister, a friend. The moment the guilty verdict was read, a wave of emotions swept through the courtroom. Relief, grief, an unbearable sense of loss that justice could never erase. Her mother, Carol, sat in the front row, gripping a folded piece of paper in her trembling hands. When the judge asked if the family had a statement to give, she stood, took a deep breath, and walked toward the podium. She unfolded the paper but never looked down at it. Lauren was my firstborn. From the moment she entered this world, she was my heart walking outside my body. She was kind, she was strong, and she deserved so much more than what happened to her. My daughter did not get to grow old. She will never get to watch her dreams unfold, to hold her own children, to see another birthday. All because of the man who was supposed to love her. Her voice broke on the last words, but she didn't stop. Daniel Hayes, you took her from us. You took her from everyone who loved her. And for what? Money? Another woman? No sentence can bring her back. But I pray that every single day for the rest of your life, you remember exactly what you've done. The courtroom was silent. Some wiped away tears. Others sat frozen. Daniel didn't look at her. He kept his gaze fixed on the table in front of him, face unreadable. When Carol turned to walk back to her seat, she didn't look at him either. She had nothing left to say. Daniel Hayes had refused to plead guilty. From the moment of his arrest, he maintained his innocence, insisting that Lauren's death had been a tragic accident and that the evidence had been misunderstood. His defense team argued that the propofol in her system had been self-administered, that Lauren had struggled with insomnia and stress, and that there was no definitive proof tying him to her death. But the prosecution dismantled every argument. The pharmacy footage, the hidden phone and secret messages, the life insurance policy, the search history, and then came the medical expert's testimony. The amount of propofol found in Lauren Hayes' system was not consistent with recreational use. It was a lethal dose administered by injection. She would not have been capable of injecting herself in the location where the needle mark was found. This was not self-inflicted. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the courtroom held its breath. We, the jury, find the defendant, Daniel Hayes, guilty of murder in the first degree. A sharp gasp came from Daniel's defense team. His attorney reached out, whispering something to him, but Daniel didn't move. For the first time since the trial had begun, the reality of his fate settled in. Life in prison. No chance of parole. The judge's voice was firm. You carried out an act of premeditated murder against your wife. You manipulated, deceived, and took the life of someone who trusted you. Your actions were calculated. They were deliberate, and they were cruel. You will spend the rest of your life behind bars. Lauren's family wept. The weight of justice was accurate, but so was the pain of knowing it would never bring her back. Daniel Hayes is now serving a life sentence at San Quentin State Prison. He will never walk free again. Lauren's case became more than a courtroom battle. It became a cautionary tale. Advocates for domestic violence awareness pointed to her story as a tragic example of how abuse isn't always physical and how financial and emotional control can be just as dangerous. A foundation was started in her name, providing resources for women trying to leave toxic relationships before it's too late. For her family, every anniversary, birthday, and holiday is a reminder of what was stolen from them. But in the quiet moments when they think of her, they don't think of the trial. They think of Lauren's laugh, her kindness, and the way she lit up a room. And they hold on to the only thing they have left, her memory. Lauren Hayes went to bed that night, believing she would wake up the following day. She had no reason to suspect otherwise. She had a future she was planning for, a life she was ready to rebuild. But someone else had already decided that she wouldn't get that chance. Her story isn't just about betrayal. It's about control, about manipulation, about how danger doesn't always come from a stranger in the dark, but sometimes from the person sleeping beside you. One pill. That's all it was supposed to be. A simple remedy for a restless night. But by morning, she was gone. And the question remains, could this have been prevented? Lauren had confided in friends, dropping hints that something in her marriage didn't feel right. She had started taking steps to protect herself. She was planning to leave. But leaving isn't always enough. And sometimes the most dangerous moment isn't while you're in the relationship. It's when you decide to walk away. Cases like Lauren's aren't isolated. Every year, thousands of women lose their lives at the hands of someone they once trusted. Sometimes the warning signs are there. Other times, they're buried beneath years of carefully crafted deception. So what do you think? Did Lauren's friends and family miss something? Could she have been saved if someone had intervened sooner? Or was Daniel Hayes always going to carry out his plan, no matter what? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you or someone you know is in a situation that feels unsafe, don't wait. Reach out. Help is out there. Thank you for watching. Stay safe.